With so much glorious weirdness going down all over the place in the Star Wars franchise, it's easy to just accept and overlook those moments that secretly stand out as all kinds of odd and inexplicable. We're talking about those Star Wars occurrences that may not have seemed all that unusual at first, but soon left you stroking your chin like a certain legendary Jedi Master once you really thought about them. Either way, I am Gareth, this is What Culture Star Wars, and here are 10 more bizarre Star Wars moments you just accepted. Number 10, why do only 3 Jedi speak on the Council? First introduced during George Lucas's 1999 return to the galaxy far, far away that was Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. The Jedi High Council boasted some of the wisest, most powerful and iconic Jedi Masters this universe had ever known. It was in this room that Qui-Gon Jinn attempted to convince the likes of Mace Windu and Yoda to allow him to train a young Anakin Skywalker. And that same Chosen One kicked up a fuss about being put on the Council but not being granted the rank of Master. How can you be- I'm not gonna go there. But what you probably didn't really take in when sitting through these various exchanges is the fact that bizarrely only a select few are seemingly granted the rank of talking masters here. Now sure, on the small screen, the likes of Star Wars The Clone Wars did at least make an effort to show that folks outside of Yoda, Windu, Ki-Adi-Mundi and ObiWan Kenobis are actually allowed to occasionally open their mouths in this room. But on the big screen, it's just weirdly accepted when watching the prequels that the majority of the people on that council leave all of the jabbering to the big name Jedi. And speaking of Jedi Masters, I want to know who is your favourite Jedi Master on the Council? It's Plo Koon, isn't it? I know, just put Plo Koon in the comment section. Number 9, the multiple ways to switch on Anakin's lightsaber. No weapon in this galaxy far, far away is more iconic than the laser sword first used by Anakin Skywalker during the prequel trilogy. Chronologically, I mean, this lightsaber would be passed down to his son Luke during the original trilogy, before then being used by the likes of Finn and Rey in the sequels, finding itself in the middle of some of the most important and captivating duels and moments in Star Wars history. One strange thing about this legendary weapon everyone just happily accepts, or perhaps hasn't even noticed though, is that it can actually be turned on in a number of ways. You know what I mean? Luke was the first person seen igniting the blue sword on Tatooine during 1977's Star Wars, using the large block midway down the handle to do so. However, in both the Star Wars The Clone Wars series and the sequel trilogy, people choose to smash the big red button to unleash the blue. Anakin's beloved Padme actually clicks it on with that button in the Hostage Crisis episode in the animated show's first season, with Finn also doing that in Episode 7 The Force Awakens during the Battle of Takodana. Which way is correct? Are they both? Well, according to a few Star Wars visual dictionaries, the middle block is the correct activation matrix, with the red button actually just being used to adjust the length. Again, keep it clean, you filthy animals. So while technically Luke's way is correct, many have just generally come to accept that this lightsaber seems to bizarrely have many different turn-on switches. Cheers for watching this video today, folks, and if you're enjoying what you're watching, then hit that subscribe button down below for more of this What Culture Star Wars stuff in your part of the galaxy. Number 8, not tilting your Star Destroyer when it's being attacked by space horses. Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker, isn't a movie known for making all that much sense, admittedly, and perhaps it's the presence of everything from Emperors somehow returning, to ridiculous Sith daggers that pulled attention away from another particularly strange occurrence that many folks just seemingly accepted in the middle of the film's Exegol climax. Remember when Finn and Janna hop on a bunch of space horses, actually known as Orbaks, and ride into battle on the surface of a Star Destroyer against the enemy? It made for a cool visual, sure, but it's one that shouldn't have really been allowed to happen, right? Instead of General Pride sending out his own troops to take out the incoming Resistance fighters here, wouldn't it have just been easier to slightly tilt said massive spaceship, like just move it a little bit? That simple action right there would have surely brought a swift end to this attack, as Finn and the gang all slid off the Star Destroyer's surface and tumbled to their unfortunate deaths. Most folks were too busy trying to get their heads around baffling developments like Rey being a Palpatine to really focus on, or even care about this illogical move though, and were just happy the whole perplexing experience was reaching its end. Number 7, Luke Skywalker barely acknowledges his mother. Throughout much of the original trilogy, farm boy turned Jedi Luke Skywalker is largely focused on his father, a pops who would eventually be revealed as the big bad cyborg known as Darth Vader. And while this was certainly the most important relationship present in episodes 4 to 6, it is still a little weird that Luke doesn't seem to care about his mother anywhere near as much as his dad. Or at all, really. He does have a small chat with his sister Leia Organa about her during episode 6, Return of the Jedi, but apart from learning that she was very beautiful, kind, but sad, instead. From a daughter who didn't actually spend all that much time in her presence before she died, Luke doesn't really look to find any more information about his mother in the films, which is a bit odd. After discovering the truth about Anakin Skywalker, why wouldn't Luke also ask Obi-Wan about his mom, how she met his father, and how important a role she played in the Clone Wars? Now, you could argue that he was probably just a bit too occupied by the thought of trying to bring his father, who he'd heard a lot more about over the years, back to the light, and the surprising news of having a sister to think about asking a few more Padme Amidala questions. And in reality, George Lucas probably just hadn't fully figured out Padme's backstory at the time of the OG trilogy. But it's still just a weirdly accepted detail that Luke doesn't appear to be all that bothered about his mother during his many on-screen Star Wars appearances. Number 6, the wrong lightsabers being used at times. Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, undoubtedly boasts some of the most gripping lightsaber action of the entire Skywalker saga. In this prequel-ending epic, the Dark Lord of the Sith himself, Darth Sidious, crosses laser swords with Jedi masters like Mace Windu in thrilling battles. And ObiWan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker find themselves involved in one of the most emotional fights in the franchise's history. But both of those lightsaber moments actually contain some pretty bizarre details. At one point in that Palpatine-Windu duel, the former can actually be briefly and strangely seen boasting Anakin's lightsaber. And in that Kenobi-Skywalker-Mustafar clash, Anakin goes from trying to use Obi-Wan's own lightsaber to kill him as he chokes him with his other hand, to that weapon being switched back to his own in the next shot. This was all just a case of reshoots and scenes being changed in the edit, resulting in a weird little lightsaber beat in each respective scene. And in the end, fans were either just too caught up in the fights to even spot the brief errors, or simply just accepted them as weird little reminders of what a scene could have been. Originally, Anakin was seemingly going to be present from the beginning of that Windu-Palps fight, hence why the latter got his hands on Skywalker's weapon. And Kenobi and Skywalker's duel would have initially contained a moment when Obi-Wan used Anakin's lightsaber, but that section was cut out for pacing reasons, so now you know. Number 5, that god-awful Obi-Wan wig. Another case of reshoots leading to a ridiculously weird moment fans just eventually accepted or tried to ignore during a Star Wars picture. Obi-Wan Kenobi's hair noticeably, changes in Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. In most of that prequel starting adventure, Ewan McGregor's Padawan ponytail and braid look doesn't really stick out all that much, when compared to the many other outrageous hairstyles boasted in that film. But there are a few points in the film when Kenobi's locks go from looking quite natural to anything but, as McGregor evidently sports a dodgy wig. It sticks out most during the moments he chats with his master Qui-Gon Jinn on Tatooine after Anakin has won the pod race, and Naboo before they find where the Gungans have wandered off to. As for why McGregor is in a hairpiece here, well, that's because the actor was off doing another project at the time where he wasn't allowed to cut his hair. So Lucas and his team had to shove him in a terrible short hair wig for these strange looking reshoot scenes and just hoped people wouldn't notice. But many obviously did, and it's now just become another silly little detail that helps make this first prequel such a fun one to revisit. Oh, seeing that wig on the big screen was a fun old time recently. Number 4, Palpatine had a reactor shaft in his throne room. Before he'd eventually make his unwanted return in the sequel trilogy, Emperor Palpatine famously perished on the Death Star 2 towards the end of Episode 6, Return of the Jedi. He hilariously met his end after being picked up and chucked down a reactor shaft on that massive space station by Darth Vader, with the cyborg Sith Lord finally seeing the light and saving his baby boy from Palp's lightning before it was too late. But with all this shocking and fist-pumping mayhem going down, you probably never stopped to ask yourself one rather important question. Why on earth did Sheev have a damn reactor shaft in his throne room in the first place? Some would argue that it was simply a way to intimidate all who stepped into his office at the top of his tall Tower of Evil on the superweapon. Or perhaps it was just his way of keeping himself somewhat connected to the terrifying power the space station possessed. In reality though, it was put there to epically and swiftly get rid of the original trilogy's big bad at the right moment, with most fans not really thinking twice about the bizarre hole, and just accepting that this completely pointless shaft is the sort of odd but cool thing you would find in your average evil lair. Put simply, why's he got this bizarre shaft in his room? Well, because why not? Number 3, Padme's weird huge pause between two lines. Tasked with protecting Padme Amidala in the wake of the Senator surviving a few assassination attempts, Anakin Skywalker eventually arrives on Naboo with the former Queen. And it's during this Attack of the Clones moment when the two eventual lovers have a chat about her time as Queen of that planet. There's a small moment within that conversation, however, that you probably never realized was remarkably bizarre, and ultimately just accepted as normal when taken in this scene the first few times. As Amidala explains that she was relieved when her 2 terms were up, the two are seen walking towards some nearby ice steps. Padme then follows up that thought by saying she couldn't refuse the Queen when she asked her to serve as senator, as the action suddenly cuts to a shot of them already halfway down the long corridor they were heading towards. So did the two just awkwardly walk in silence while Amidala really mulled over her next words? Well, this was actually originally a much longer exchange, with an extended version of the scene revealing that Padme actually talked a little more about politics with Annie, and her dreams of starting a family in the moments between approaching those steps and getting halfway down the corridor. In the theatrical cut though, the way the scene is cut together just makes it look like Padme strangely took a long old pause between two linked thoughts. Weird, but easily overlooked by most. Number 2, ObiWan Kenobi is supposed to have aged 10 years between episodes 1 and 2. Right. While setting two movies shot relatively close together a decade apart may sound like an interesting concept on paper, it does bring with it some challenges. A big one being that many of the actors set to reprise their roles in that picture won't have aged 10 years in reality, meaning that more work needs to be done to convince audiences that their characters are very much a decade older. In the case of Ewan McGregor in Episode 2 Attack of the Clones though, all of the beards and mullets in the world still didn't fully disguise the fact that this Scottish sensation didn't visibly look like an ObiWan Kenobi who was 10 years wiser. It had only been 3 years in between shoots on episode 1 and 2, meaning McGregor had gone from being 26 to 29 in real life, while Kenobi had jumped from 25 to 35 in the galaxy far, far away. It's a big old jump. Most were willing to forgive the fact the star clearly didn't look 10 years older though, mostly because he still largely nailed his performance, creating a version of Kenobi that felt more commanding and believable as a mentor figure than when we last saw him, even if he didn't honestly look like he'd reached his 30s yet. Number 1, the sound of explosions and ships in space. This is a weird regular occurrence Star Wars fans have just been happily accepting for decades, and it's not hard to see why really. In real life you can't hear any sounds in space because it's a vacuum. There's almost no matter in it, and with there being no molecules or atoms that carry sound waves, no noises can be heard. There's some science for you. So all of those times when Death Stars have exploded and made one hell of a bang, that simply would not be possible. But where would the fun be in this galaxy far, far away if TIE fighters shot out lasers that made zero noise as they left their cannons? We'd also be living in a world without the deeply satisfying sound of a seismic charge ripping through space. And that's not a life worth even thinking about, is it? So while it's certainly a bizarre detail that isn't even remotely accurate based on the way our galaxy works, most Star Wars fans have just accepted that this universe plays by its own rules. In our space, no one can hear you scream, but in this space you can hear the glorious sound of X-Wings and TIE fighters roaring through it, and starships jumping to hyperspace. And that's the way, we like it.